Hi, thank you. And really, this is an interactive session. And so I'm not talking at you. I want to talk to you. Thank you. And then some of the things that we'll discuss, it's almost some of the stuff that goes beyond environmental sustainability too. And I'll get into that in a second here. But just very quickly about myself, my name is Navroop K Sahdev. I'm the founder CEO of The Digital Economist. And what we do is we are a think and do tank. On the think side of things, we have a center of excellence on human-centered global economy. And that's our ideas factory. We do research, writing. We're based in DC. And on the do side of things, it's a venture studio model where we spin off initiatives that we have incubated, if you may, and in the center and the actionable solutions at that end. And so, Alexandros had reached out to me to talk to all of you about a little bit about stakeholder capitalism. And of course, that's Davos and the World Economic Forum agenda as well, which is where the Digital Economist was launched in 2020. And we've been going back every year. And then also sustainability. And so over the years, what I learned is that the problems are actually much deeper. And I'll start to share my slides in a second here, but they extend beyond environmental sustainability. We have to address from a more systemic perspective what brought us to where we are at the first place. So, and again, that extends beyond carbon accounting, or how do we include various stakeholders. That's key, but I think we need to move beyond that too. In fact, in 2021, I hosted a summit called Beyond Stakeholder Capitalism. So it's a little bit of a play on the fact that we need to move beyond saying who is a stakeholder, who's not, because that's the conversation you then get into, and actually focus on building a human-centered world, which is a lot more inclusive, if you may. And that topic, as I hope you can see my screen, is actually governance. So I'll tie that all together in terms of sustainability, the issue of governance and the lack thereof, or at least of responsible governance, and particularly decentralized governance, and then, of course, natural resource exploitation and whatnot. So just to kind of give you a sense of what we're going to be talking about today, our mission that I discussed a little bit, the convergence of different technologies, and some of the considerations around economics, governance, how that relates to value, and then what happens if we start to treat blockchain as a common pool resource, which all of this work has emerged from Ostrom's work on governing the commons, natural resources. This is before the internet and a lot of the digital technologies were invented. Some considerations around governance, and we'll talk about design principles that won her the Nobel Prize in economics, and then some of the work that we've been pursuing over the past couple of years on this specifically. So yeah, as I mentioned, what we do is drive different technologies towards a human-centered global economy. And I say this because, so where I'm coming from, what I've been focused on. I've been with MIT for 5+ years, and originally came to the US to do my thesis work at Harvard Kennedy. And a lot of the policy side of things are really critical in a lot of this work. And of course, stakeholder capitalism is all about including more people into the fold, right? As I mentioned, we are based in DC. I'm not going to read this slide, but I do like to share, when we talk about economics, right, when we talk about the economy or stakeholder economy, it's worth thinking about the fact that the Greek word economia means household management, right? And digital technologies allow us a way to augment, if you may, increase and add human capabilities beyond just what the physical world, if you may, allows us, right? The whole world is connected. through digital tech at this point. And we have mobility and communications and reach like we never did as a species. And so digital economists, just the way we sort of came up with this is somebody who uses the digital as a way and a masterful steward of the planetary global economy. So that's kind of where a lot of our work is also stemming from. So I want to quickly kind of talk to all of you and then open it up, because I personally prefer a lot more interaction and have questions and comments from all of you. But just to, I guess, give you some of the ideas to seed the thoughts, if you may, talk a little bit about what are the pillars of digital inclusion, right? Which again is at the core and is positioned as a driver to drive sustainability and move to a model of capitalism that is non-exploitative and is not just about value that flows up on the top, right? We currently live in a world where inequality is back to pre-World War I levels. So we're looking at a world that's increasingly polarized, fragmented, unequal. And so not only this is timely, but we have to make sure that all of this is rooted in reality of the way the world currently works. And so the thinking here is, how can we actually change the underlying infrastructure, if you may, one bit at a time, right? Not suggesting a revolution. So the first pillar is, of course, the economic considerations. There is microeconomic analysis companies and organizations undertake. You look at functions. Again, you can look at token systems, the new ways we can incentivize behavior. You can look at the good old economics on optimization, which a lot of it is actually doesn't quite hold true if you include cognitive biases and all those considerations. Then on the macroeconomic side of things, you have these two levers from a government perspective, which is fiscal policy and monetary policy. So you apply that to the digital world and the decentralized world. Then you're looking at supply of tokens and demand for tokens, inflation, liquidity, all those other things when you look at a new asset class, if you may. So governance actually ties very closely with this, and it is because of lack of governance, lack of inclusion, if you may, that we have gone to a point where essentially we're torching the planet, right? And a few people have more wealth than half of the world combined. So think of this as a governance issue, right? You can almost reframe this as a governance issue because these people, and I'll tell you why, because these people are over and beyond the social contract, if you may, right? Corporations cannot be, and many of you might know, 100 corporations are responsible, 100 biggest companies in the world are responsible for more than 70% of the emissions worldwide. But these corporations are across jurisdictions. So that means no one country can actually bring them under its sole sovereign territory and legal system. So now that's where things start to break down, right? Because national governments can only really control their laws that are in their jurisdiction, and then citizens can really only vote for, again, that jurisdiction alone, but then corporations span the globe. So they just do jurisdiction shopping, right? If it doesn't work here, they will go exploit somewhere else. So again, it's a governance issue. That's why we have sustainability as top of corporate agenda, with also risk of greenwashing. And so far, it's not very encouraging for what we're seeing, even though there's a lot of momentum to have and make sure that every business is sustainable. there's still quite a bit of path to go, and the incentives continue to be adversely aligned. So coming back to, again, why governance is key and how we need to pull that lever, if you may, in order to ensure sustainability, in order to ensure inclusion and stakeholder participation. There's a variety of mechanisms, if you may, and a bunch of these are not new inventions, right? You see a lot of this voting and blockchain and all these other cool things. They're actually, a lot of it is old wine in new bottles. And I'll talk a little bit about Ostrom's work as well. So we're looking at decentralization as an essential pillar, right? Every time you have hierarchies, you would have adverse incentives, because those who are at the top would want to collect all of the value. We work very closely with the World Bank, and they came out a few years ago and confirmed that the trickle-down economics actually doesn't work, right? I'm born and raised in India, so that was sort of the development narrative for a number of decades. So, let the rich countries grow as aggressively as possible, and then value would trickle down to poor countries as a result, because of globalization and because the world is connected. We now know for sure that it doesn't work. Quite the opposite has happened. This core and then the periphery model of development, where the value is extracted from the peripheral, if you may, economies that are not fully or as much integrated into the global economy as, say, the US or the EU. And we continue to see, because of the adverse terms of trade, we actually have a opposite of that, which is the core continues to be more and more nurtured by resources that don't belong to them, right? An example is chocolates in Switzerland, right? The world knows Switzerland for making chocolates. Switzerland doesn't grow any chocolate, right? So they have simply tapped into again the chocolate that comes from Africa, from Latin America, and they are in the latter part of the supply chain, if you may, of chocolate, right? And that's where they add the most value as indicated by price, right? So the farmers in countries where chocolate actually originates from barely get anything for that. So this is an example of the core and the periphery model of current capitalism that's in the world, right? Now, if there's better governance, if there's fair terms of trade, and I've sat in WTO meetings, I started my career at the UN Environment Program. I used to work in the trade unit in Switzerland and Geneva. This would be very different. So the question is, does Web3 give us the opportunity to rethink how we govern our shared resources, right? Are we able to move away from the current broken model of private property, the winner takes it all models, to something that is more inclusive, perhaps not perfect, over the next years? So my sort of proposal here, and again, the work that I've been doing, and this is part of a number of people involved in this, so I'm not just representing myself here, and that's important to note. And if there's anyone interested in carrying this forward, I'm happy to talk to you and give you sort of further milestones here as well on where this is going globally. Again, decentralization allows us to align these activities, right? And I'll talk about the principles in a second, and of various assets, of various resources worldwide, that has to have more of the community voice. And with blockchain and with digital tech, we actually have resources and capabilities and tools for the first time to ensure governance can take place, right? We live in what is called delegated democracies. In other words, we pick people who represent us, right? Unless it's a very small country, sort of like Switzerland, which has direct democracy, Most of us live in delegated democracies, if we are lucky enough to live in a democracy at the first place. And so these representatives are supposed to, again, ensure that the needs of the population are met. And of course, we all know, because of corruption and what have you, that doesn't quite happen. But with our cell phones, with blockchain and its immutability, we, for the first time, have the tools, if we implement them, to ensure governance and enable stakeholder capitalism that perhaps starts to look a little bit more like direct democracy. So we've built a number of frameworks: the framework for token confidence, design principles for governance, which I mentioned comes from Elinor Ostrom's work. She was also the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics, and now we have one other woman from Harvard who's won that over the past 100 years. And then all of this as it ties into value, right? And again, this is a body of work we've done over the past years, at least 6 years, on how do we perceive and measure value? Do the new asset classes give us a way to rethink value, right? So you start to get into like really cool topics here around computational mechanics, around algorithmic economics, right? Because think about it, I remember when Facebook went public, everybody was asking, well, what does Facebook own, right? What are its assets? And the short answer is data, right? And what they can do with it. So now in the digital economy, the asset class that's valued is completely different from what used to be the case 20 years ago. And that has accelerated massively over the past 20 years. And so, again, value from a behavioral economics point of view is mostly perceived value. And so this is kind of the, I guess, what you would have discovered if you read the paper on figuring out tokenomics for digital assets. It's the first paper in behavioral economics applied to token valuation. And for those of you who are interested, it was published in Blockchain Economics, which is the first book on the topic, along with colleagues worldwide. So you can look that up if you're interested in learning more. But again, if you look at complex social interactions, you start to see that the perception of value is a key driver of value, right? Your fiat currency, your currency note, is simply a promise. You don't own the money, right? Money is a human invention. You don't own that dollar or whatever currency you have. It is a promise that the government would keep. It's part of the promise to provide you goods and services that it is worth. So again, you start to see how value, the different stakeholders in the economy interact with, ultimately the economics of it, and hence, governance becomes a key tool to ensure that is equitable and not just serves a handful. So I'm going to pause you very quickly. I know there's a lot here. Is everybody with me? Give me a show of hands. So far, so good. I see one person. Keep moving forward. Excellent. Great. So yeah, this is kind of, thank you, sort of the more, I guess, technical aspect of it, right? I'm not going to say to you, oh, sustainability is important. I'm not going to say to you, oh, our planet is precious. Of course it is, right? We all know that. What I want to talk about today is what are the mechanisms, what are the levers you can pull and push in order to drive change, and what that looks like, right? And why it is important, right? What is it that economists in econ departments are discussing? How are they perceiving, measuring what is valuable? What are the policy advisors to governments, economic advisors to governments looking at? And how does Web3 change some of those? And many of them are still, again, on a learning curve. We all are, but of course, large institutions are even slower to move. So if some of you in this group are the champions for a better and more equitable world, I think that's a major win and a major outcome of today's interaction here. So this kind of gets a little bit more specific than what I just talked about. Let me take a step back and talk a little bit about commons. So the institution of private property, as we know it today, was invented by the British, right? And then exported to the whole world through violence and colonialism and forced way of doing things. But a lot of the world until that point, and still is designed and lives more as shared resources or common pool resources. And the technical term in the literature is shorter of that, simply called commons as a plural, not a common, but a commons, even if you're referring to one common pool resource. And so think about the oceans, right? Who owns the oceans? No one and everyone. Who owns outer space? No one and everyone, right? So these are examples of commons. And so, and many of you might have heard of the tragedy of the commons, which means if nobody owns something, then everybody would optimize for their self. And that would in fact lead to what is called the tragedy, if you may, the overuse of these natural resources. And as a result, there's risk for it to be completely destroyed, actually, or completely finite or used to a point where they no longer exist, right? So humans have managed to ensure that a lot of the species have gone extinct in the world, right? So other life forms. But you can also think of it like your neighborhood lake or river, right? If you may. So that's another example of commons. The government doesn't own the river, right? It has a right to do things with it, but it doesn't really own it, if you know what I'm saying. That resource belongs to the community, to the communities that are around it. And so now you have this challenge where the communities that are closer to it can access it and use it more versus the communities that are not, right? So that's where, again, governance becomes an important issue. And so what the current variety, if you may, and there are many ways to have a capitalistic society or free market economy, I think was what we really want, and not so much capitalism, is to redistribute these structures, right? Ancient civilizations have flourished around natural resources, the Indus River, for example, in the Indian subcontinent, and the Nile River in Egypt, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying is the commons are essential to the way, and if at all, human civilization has grown at the first place, right? And so then, of course, with the digital world, we're looking at common pool resources like the internet. The World Wide Web is not owned by anyone, right? It grew as a patchwork of protocols around the world. Now, again, we live in a different world where access to the internet is pretty much controlled by a few platforms. We plug into the internet through Google, for example, which is built on the internet protocol, right? Or Facebook, or other companies. So these are what we call the platform economics, which is we use these to plug into the overall commons. Wikipedia is another example of digital commons, and many of you might have heard about these open source licenses. Same idea. It's a common pool resource, and you cannot patent it. In other words, you cannot privatize the value that emerges from it. So my proposition and our proposition is that we should treat blockchain as digital commons, a further subcategory of digital commons, right, which is more focused on Web3. Now, if we do that, if we want to make sure that the shared resource is not exploited and is not owned, because that's kind of the whole point, right, of Web3, which is the Web2 world is broken. We need greater decentralization. We need infrastructure that is shared, and the cost reduction that emerges from it, and efficiency gains. So not everybody has to, build their own ledgers, but in fact, we can have a shared source of truth. then governance is key, right? And why is governance a long-term driver for growth and sustainability of the network? So some obvious responses to that, and this is, of course, not exhaustive. This is more suggestive or start to look for answers. But first and foremost is immutability, right? Governance becomes even more important because if you look at currently the way law works, you can actually kind of go back and, reopen things, and the human aspect of it, the judge, the court system, the judiciary can adjudicate with human intervention on what we knew as the truth, or determine what the truth is, the ultimate truth is. But that is not possible in blockchain. In other words, you have the record down to the very first block. So it is important that we get the governance right, because you cannot undo it, right, if it is set up correctly. And so while governance would evolve, the immutable aspect of blockchain and distributed ledger technologies more broadly require that we get governance right. Then community, right, as a way not just to incentivize the community to participate, whether it's consensus or as the ultimate beneficiary, but also the key drivers of value, right? I mean, where is value coming from? When you look at decentralized systems, it is very much the community. If it's just 5 people, you don't really need blockchain for that, right? But if it's 5,000, 50,000, 5 million, 50 million, then that starts to change the game. But then again, you can't have just 5 people making decisions for 50 million, which actually the way the world currently is set up is the case. Then, of course, the incentives, as I mentioned before, and incentives continue to be sort of sprinkled, if you may, throughout this topic, which is that without decentralized community governance, we are at the risk of, again, centralization again, and reverting back to those adverse incentives and the overuse of natural resources, which again, in the literature in economics is called the tragedy of the commons. So there's 100+ years of various economists who've commented on it and formalized it. So if you're interested in that. So this is just an introduction. And there is a book on it, which is called Governing the Commons, which, as I mentioned, Elinor Ostrom got the Nobel Prize in economics for. And so I'm just going to quickly, I guess, storm through these pretty much, and we can discuss these as well. And so just to be clear, what Ostrom did, she spent her career, she was a sociologist by training. She spent her career talking to communities around the world on how they govern their common pool resources. And her Nobel work is a condensed version of those best practices and best principles. So the wisdom that we inherited around the world from thousands of years, that's really what's condensed in this in terms of the design principles, right? We have the opportunity as technologists to build artificial systems, right? Blockchain or DLT is not a God-given order. There are decisions. There's no such thing as tech neutrality go into how these are structured. And of course, you've seen in the past, platform economics is all about where there's user generated content and value, but then only the platform where you plug into for that is able to extract all of the value from it. So companies like Meta / Facebook and Google and others have become multi-billion-dollar enterprises, and we even are looking at almost $1 trillion companies, right? If you look at market caps, because the way the incentives are aligned is that everybody who generates values doesn't actually get the value. It's only the platform that gets the value. So this is what can change that, can transform that. And again, this is not new, but this is work that has not been built upon enough. And essentially what we're doing is we're saying, well, there is an opportunity now with Web3 to transform some of that work, and and let's carry that forward and see what that looks like in the Web3 world. So very quickly, you have to define clear boundaries of the common pool resource, we're referring to the resource itself, whether it's a lake, whether it's the World Wide Web, or if it's a distributed ledger. In our case, you have to match rules to local needs and conditions, which means there's no one size fits all. You have to ensure that those who are affected by the rules of the game are able to participate in the modifications as needed over time, which, as you know, is a current debate on social media around privacy, around data collection, how much large companies know about us, probably more than we know about ourselves, our digital identity, our digital trace, persona, which are all levers that they use to market things to us, sell things to us, change our behaviors, realign our incentives, funnel us to what they are paid for in terms. So you'll start to see, as I'm going through this, why these principles are core to building any technology actually that involves more than one person. Then there's community rights that need to be respected by outside authorities, which means, so say there's a lake, right? Going back to our more sustainability focused discussion, then the government of the country needs to recognize that this lake is a common pool resource and it should be treated as such. They cannot just come in and say, oh yeah, no, now we will decide what to do with it. So the boundaries have to be clear and they need to be recognized clearly by outside actors. So developing a system that monitors members' behavior is again key, because otherwise you will end up with the tragedy of the commons. And you may not, right? But more often than not, if there are selfish actors, there's actually incentives. So say, for example, there are 100 people that use a common pool resource, say the river, which is in the village. Now, 95 of them are really well-meaning, wise people who understand the community needs and what have you. They know you're not supposed to overfish. They know you're not supposed to dirty the waters because you're going to be drinking this too. But 5 of them are like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to do as much I can with it in a way that benefits me. So that's actually what's happening with technology right now. That's actually what's the current way capitalistic societies are aligned. They're saying, well, you know, we're going to do whatever we want and fill our coffers, if you may. And so it is important that we're able to put in place systems that are able to monitor the behavior of actors, so we don't end up where the common pool resource is exploited by a handful of bad actors. Then the use of graduated sanctions for rule violators, like I just said. So now, of course, the next thing becomes, you know, the community says, well, no, this is not right. This is being shared by 100 people. It's not just for 5 of you. And so there has to be a system of incentives, or I should say disincentives, which are sanctions. Then there has to be accessible means for dispute resolution. If, you know, these 5 people turn around and say, well, no, I was doing this, you know, it's not what you say it is. And again, I'm trying to really bring it down to our day-to-day life, because a lot of this can get fairly complex when applied to governance mechanisms in, say, algorithmic systems, right? Because you have to essentially automate many of these processes. And, you know, we'll get into that a little bit, but essentially the principles remain the same no matter what kind of common resource we're looking at. And then finally, you have nested tiers that cover the entire interconnected system. So for me personally, I look at the world as a overlapping set of networks, right? And so you have a network with your family, a network with your community, your personal networks, professional networks, so on and so forth. And you start to see how these overlap and pile on each other. But then there has to be a way, and this is what this final principle talks about, for all these networks, for all these various moving parts that are dynamic, to then, you know, bubble something up that can govern the overall system too. Now, that doesn't mean it it's a hierarchical system. It's essentially a complex adaptive network, right? For some of you who have studied network science, in other words, the parts affect the overall system, and the overall system, when you zoom out and you look at it, affects every parts, and then different parts are able to change and transform the system as well, right? And that's what technology has done at a pace like no other in the history of humankind. Technology, particularly the past 20 years, the internet, for example, has completely transformed the global economy. So if you look at the global economy as a complex adaptive network, yeah. So that's kind of what I'm referring to here. And again, if you're interested, we published this paper called Blockchain as Commons, applying Ostrom's polycentric, and that's what it really is, different centers and not just one center, polycentric approach to blockchain governance. And you can access this on SSR, and I'm more than happy to chat with anyone who's interested in learning more. And I guess very quickly, as I mentioned, we have a Center of Excellence on Human-Centered Global Economy, and a lot of that work that we do here that I'm sharing has emerged from the discussions, the convening, the building of ideas, actionable solutions, bringing experts together to then figure out what those solutions are for the overarching global problems and agenda items that are ahead of us, including stakeholder capitalism, which I think is a subset of the general sort of world order, if you may. And yeah, so that's it. So I'll open it up. If anyone wants to reach out, I wanted to make sure we have at least 20 minutes. So I think we're right on time for discussion and questions. So I'll stop sharing my screen and open it up to the group.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, great overview and explanation. Thank you, Navroop. So do we have any questions at this time or any contributions? We have opened up for questions and contributions. If you have any questions, feel free to put in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I will ask you to unmute so you can ask your question. Okay, so there's a question here from Pretty Pink. What made you become interested in following this path personally?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. I just posted a link to the paper.
Thank you.
I would say I grew up in India, and I saw poverty and inequality very close to home. You know, I grew up in a middle-class family, certainly not fed with silver spoons, but, you know, I guess comfortable enough that we could focus on our education and whatnot. And so I was considered a gifted artist, and my family had encouraged me to go to art school. But I think as an empath, I decided to study economics, to specialize at 15 years old, the final 2 years of high school, which I graduated from at 17 in economics, because at that time, and still, I think I learned that the way the world goes round is money and us as economic beings. And if you want to create meaningful change and impact, the most direct way to do it is probably, if you look at the economics of our, systems, and, whether it is poverty or development work or what have you, that's sort of the most direct way to help people and create change that's meaningful. And then, of course, people go on their own spiritual journeys and their own paths of talents or what have you, but that's the first base, right? You cannot think about all these other things if you have to worry about your next meal. So it doesn't work like that. Our primary needs have to be met before we can engage in more complex or upstream, if you may, thoughts, right? All of you know sort of the hierarchy of needs. I don't fully agree with that, but there's no doubt that, of course, we need to take care of our first space. And so, to answer your question, that's what got me interested, and I've been on that journey for 17, 18 years now. Teaching, writing, researching, and more recently, over the past 6, 7 years in the blockchain space, and how can we use technology to serve humanity and really all life forms, because we share the planet with other life forms as well. To improve it, to make it better, because I think there's a lot of enthusiasm around tech, and that's something, again, we have to think about from a stakeholdership perspective, that what is technology ultimately benefiting, right? I mean, that's the question I asked myself when I started the Digital Economist, the company itself, and so that's also what became the mission, which is to build a life-centered and human-centered global economy. And so we went on to define those pillars, etc. So I hope that answers your question. But I guess my personal drive is from even when I was a child, really, and certainly as a teenager, and that's sort of translating into all these other governance and blockchain and tech and areas around even anti-corruption that we're looking at, so on and so forth.
Excellent. Thank you, Navroop. The next question here says, what are the methods to examine that blockchain is working fine? I'm not sure what the context is for this question. If Srinivasan, right, if you could give some context to this question, I think it'll be helpful.
Okay, yeah, if you're, unless you're planning to unmute yourself and elaborate on this, I can, I guess, take a shot at it.
Okay.
Right. There isn't much context, as in, I mean, I think I was commenting more broadly on how blockchain distributed ledger technology is being posited as almost a reformation movement, right, of Web 2, because that actually failed us miserably, exacerbating inequalities by the use of digital, by the use of platform economics and all these models, and that have gone to this point. Now, of course, the overall standard of living in the world has increased, but at the same time, as I said, the inequality has increased a lot too. So technology can help or it can hurt, right? And so those who are left behind are really left behind, right? They can probably almost never catch up, if you may. Maybe their children can, right? If you start to educate kids and give them the right environment or what have you. But the catch up is almost impossible in a single generation, if you look at it from a pragmatic perspective. And so the idea of blockchain, and I've been in the space for 8 years, so let's say I have a lot of baggage, if you may, and a lot of the evangelists talk about it as a way to build a better world, because if people and if humans are not going to make better decisions, if the incentives are adversely aligned, then let's actually change the underlying tech, right? Let's go from platform economics to shared infrastructure. And so that has been the enthusiasm in the space that, hey, humans are not going to change, okay? And legal stuff takes like years to change. And it, again, has baggage of 100, 200 years, at least in the US more. And then, probably similar in many other jurisdictions. And then, of course, younger countries with their own problems and challenges, right? Particularly the post-colonial economies. And so if we can, in fact, change the underlying technology, we can change the underlying infrastructure, maybe there is a chance that we can build better stakeholder models and ensure sustainability, participatory governance, equitability, diversity, etc. in it. So that's those are kind of the motivations, if you may. What are the methods to ensure that blockchain is working fine. It completely depends on what you're referring to, right? There's all sorts of public blockchains, private blockchains. The technology is still very young. It still hasn't had large scale adoption, so on and so forth. So I hope that sort of clarifies at least a little bit. I wasn't saying that, oh, blockchain is a solution to everything. Not at all. I was referring to the kind of the overarching global agenda on stakeholder capitalism.
All right, thank you for that. So we have the next question, and it says, what are some of the most promising Web3 projects and platforms currently in development?
Yeah, I avoid sort of naming names because it's almost like you need a few years to kind of see if something actually emerges that is useful and tangible. But I guess I can share a little bit about what I'm personally excited about. So there's the layer 3 chains, which are addressing immutability and scalability and speed simultaneously. So Bitcoin is sort of the first generation of blockchain, Ethereum, and sort of its related chains as the second generation. And so a third generation is now emerging. So we're looking at, okay, can they drive large scale adoption and inclusion of communities? So that's interesting for me, right? And I'm referring to a whole bunch of chains here. We are, of course, in a bear market, and we are looking at a lot of projects failing and what have you. So bear that in mind. And again, from a more layer 2 perspective, layer 2 would be projects that are built on chains that are blockchain itself. That's considered layer 1. Again, I think what is really exciting as an overall movement in the space is a lot of the art community, a lot of the creatives that have joined the space, right? So the first use case has been NFTs. Can they sell their art online? Can it finally be valued? So on and so forth. But I do think that's just the tip of the iceberg. And so I'm really excited about the fact that Web3 has involved a lot more people. Because I mean, if you look at what was happening, it still is before that, is humans are being taken out of every business process, innovation or trading, and so algorithms are replacing them. But actually, if you look at the Web3 space and where it's going, it is trying to replicate the fullness and the wholeness of the human experience in the digital realm. So immersive technologies, right? And 3D and metaverse. What are they really trying to do is that, again, you can have concerts in the metaverse. Like, what does that mean, right? So what they're really trying to do is replicate the experience of arts and music and seeing and hearing and sort of our sort of full immersiveness that we have, I guess, in life, which was not possible and is not possible just by staring into screens in the digital world. So that's very exciting, and it's interesting. And I'll share the link here because I gave my second TED Talk a few months ago. And that's sort of what I talked about. I mean, if you take a step back, what is it that the Web3 technologies, what are they trying to achieve after all, right? So I talked about arts instead of tech for the sake of tech as our technological future. So I just shared the link here with all of you.
All right. So while you were speaking, a third question came in from Vikas, who wants to know. Okay, so he says, won't a poly governance model slow down everything? He means the decisions, the processing, the coordination. He thinks this could also lead to conflict, and he wants to know, how can this be overcome?
Yeah, that's a great question and a nuanced one, Vikas. Thank you for that. My first reaction to that is that the alternative is hierarchies, which you've seen what they have brought us to, right? You as in all of us here, not referring to you in particular, right? And so what is the alternative? We essentially have delegated our ability to make decisions in most of the large democracies worldwide. And so I think that's broken. So we actually need to start experimenting with these polycentric governance models, if not implement them right away in various domains. And I think maybe I could reemphasize my point, which is that this is the way the world has been, right, for thousands of years, where we have common pool resources that are being I should say, governed in a shared capacity, right? And so we're now looking at technology. First, it was sort of more empires and world wars and all that history, and now we're looking at technology that has become a way to aggregate value, aggregate power, aggregate money through the use of these platforms. But to come back to your point, I think, again, the point I made was that we have technology where we can actually finally have shared decision making, and we can do it in real time. And first and foremost, with the use of mobile tech, right? Coordination is hard, but there are multi-stakeholder processes. There are experts who do this work. I mean, UN tried to do it, as you know, it failed miserably for the most part. But if, for example, we can have voting on blockchain, right? And we can have a proof that everybody voted, but it will still stay anonymous. So, for example, I would know that Vikas has voted, but I don't know what Vikas voted for, right? So we can have, design of the system that ensures that, and then the results of such a system could be clear in almost real time, right? And of course, I'm not recommending removing humans completely. So there would be coordination challenges. It's actually a formalized economics topic, what we call as coordination challenges, which creates costs, inefficiencies, and asymmetric information, that goes into this. So there would be things to work through, but I think, to my point earlier, what is the alternative, right? We already have a lot of conflict and an increasingly unequal world.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, so there's a comment here from David, and he would like to have you, he says he would like to have you at Polkadot.Safari in real life or virtual. He thinks you'd make a very inspirational guest there.
I would love to. Yeah, please send me the details. I don't think I'm seeing all of the comments here. Maybe they were sent to you privately.
No.
But yeah, please reach out. And I did want to share one more thing with all of you, which is the Africa Coalition, because I see there's a solid representation of colleagues from Africa here. So I'm just sharing the link here. We launched it in Davos in January, so just a month ago. And essentially changing the narrative, and rather than the world defining what Africa should be doing, the idea is development and growth and all those things of Africa, by Africa, and what makes sense for Africans to do, and the rest of the world supporting that. So if that's of interest, let us know, and feel free to reach out to me. I'll drop my email here again, and we can figure out how we can involve some of the folks from here. So I think that's about right.
Amazing. Thank you for this great resources, Navroop. It's Really been great having you here. And I'm just going to take our very last question for this session because we are almost out of time. And this question says, what mechanisms can we use to ensure sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, the whole world is trying to figure this out, right? I think my quick take is simply that it's like your house is on fire, you know? And when your house is on fire, the first thing to do is stop what is burning it at the first place. And so that has to happen. So the transition away from the issues and the activities that brought us to at this point are the first thing, right? And so we cannot say, oh yeah, you can burn as much carbon, or you can burn this much carbon, you can just buy, like, these credits elsewhere. Like, what does that even mean, right? That doesn't solve the problem. You're still adding more fuel that is burning the house. You're just extrapolating or externalizing, as we say in econ, that problem to something else. So it's not gonna solve it, right? So for me, it's not just about the tools. It's not just about the measurements, etc. Those are kind of greenwashing. That's a way to distract focus, so companies can keep doing what they're doing, national governments can keep extracting or pumping oil, while the intellectual community, if you may, is lost in developing mathematical models. So I would say look out for that. And that's what I've learned over the past, almost 11 years that I've been working on sustainability. I do want to share another resource with you. I guess all of my learning and what have you is brought us to a point where, I lead this system, or I should say the community called the Digital Economist. And so we actually published a book on sustainability, and I just dropped that link here. It's called Meeting the Climate Challenge. So actionable solutions, interventions, whether on energy, we have a partnership with IBM, on renewable energy, or with gender, work that we're doing with the World Bank, and along with co-authors from around the world, from World Economic Forum and other key stakeholder organizations. We launched this in the UN General Assembly Week last year in September in New York. So if any of you are interested, this is a book to go through some of those actionable solutions. And I'll be happy to chat more and connect you with the right people. So that's
amazing. Wow. Excellent presentation and session, Navroop. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the students, as well as the Unit Masters team and the entire Unit Network for this amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
Everyone, appreciate you all. Okay, all the best. Final week for you. Hopefully I was able to share something interesting and new, and wish you the very, very best, and great success, as well as progress ahead. So take care, and good luck to all of you.
Thank you. Good luck. Good luck to you, Navroop. Yes, and to all the students, please share what you have learned from today's session, and please feel free to find her on LinkedIn. And if you have to tag, please use the Unit Masters hashtag for your post, and tag the Unit Network as well as Navroop, if you may. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's session. Hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day.